Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, well, if you're interested, I could tell you the following. We conducted very important and I think useful discussions here at this meeting. The initiative to convene this meeting came about a month ago when it became clear that there were problems being encountered in implementing Annan's six-point plan, in particular when the so-called Free Syrian Army said that they would not implement the requirements of this plan, that is the ceasefire. And so we called upon our partners to urgently convene such a meeting, and our thinking coincided with that of Kofi Annan, who decided he should set up a contact group, and these two ideas came together, and today they resulted in this meeting which launched the activities of the so-called action group. Preparatory work for the meeting was not easy. We, in due time, sent out our vision in the draft declaration, and the main thrust of that was that all key external players should work in a coordinated manner to ensure the implementation of the peace plan, and that each external player should exert leverage on the Syrian side over which it might have some influence, so that they would comply with the provisions of the plan which was approved by the UN Security Council. And in analogy, we called upon all Syrian sides to sit down at the negotiating table and to start to discuss what kind of country they would like to live in. Of course, this has to be a representative group of participants, as is provided for by the Kofi Annan plan, the government, and all of the Syrian opposition groups. Our colleagues considered that we should have a more detailed document. Such a document was drafted by the team of the Joint Special Envoy, and we were prepared to work on it, although in its first initial version there were provisions that we could not support. We stated this in advance. We were in contact with Kofi Annan's group, his team, and our American partners and the European partners and the countries of the region, and today I am delighted that what some of our partners were saying has not proven to be the truth. Some of them said that they would not see a comma changed in Kofi Annan's draft outcome document. They said they wouldn't even come to Geneva if that was going to be the case. We were very calm in the face of this. We said that we're not here just to rubber stamp a document, even a document which comes from the pen of such a respected international actor, and even Kofi Annan himself didn't react to such an ultimatum. He said that we should come here to discuss the document, and that is how we approached the document. The threat that someone wouldn't come if even a comma was going to be changed in the plan did not prove to be the case, was not justified. So we've been able to work constructively today, and in the future I think that we will need to avoid any attempts to, how shall I put it, to deliver any kinds of ultimatums of that kind, and to refuse the intellectual process that we saw today, that we had at the ministerial level. As a result of this intellectual process, we have produced this document that I am sure you have all read through. In the document presented by Kofi Annan, and then the document that Hillary Clinton talked about with you, I'm not going to interpret any sections of the document. The document speaks for itself. We consider it to be of key importance that there is no attempt in the document to impose upon the Syrian side any kind of transitional process. We haven't imposed the nature of it on them. In it, we confirm the generally accepted principles according to which a democratic state should be established: respect of human rights, respect of the rights of minorities, which is highly topical as there are so many ethnic minorities and different confessions in a country like Syria, the need to have free and fair elections, and the formation of the governing bodies of the state on the basis of the freely expressed will of the people. All of these are issues which are not controversial, and they're contained in the document. And then, in the context of these principles, we're going to build the work for transition and take it to a new stage, but that work will be done by the Syrians themselves. That is very clearly stated in the document. It's a Syrian-led transition. We have achieved a situation where there are no prior preconditions to the transitional process and the national dialogue, and there are no attempts to exclude any kind of group from this process. They are not excluded from any part of the process, and many of our partners wanted that. We convinced them that that is not an acceptable approach, and such a requirement, such a prior condition, has not been included in the outcome document. And we also managed to achieve agreement with all of our partners as to the need to exert leverage on all sides and not to require any kind of unilateral measures or steps from any side, to send a clear signal to the government and the armed opposition on the need to simultaneously cease all armed activities and to support the UN mission to Syria to stabilize the situation. In the initial version of the text, there were provisions stating that the government should cease armed activities and to withdraw its troops from towns and cities, populated areas, but the opposition then would have to decide whether it was prepared to join in or not. That, of course, was not at all a realistic approach, and that has been deleted from the document. In the document now, we have the requirements which are simultaneously sent to the government, the authorities, and all opposition groups. A requirement that they clearly apply the Kofi Annan plan, that they simultaneously cease all armed activities. In many towns and cities, this needs to be done because some of these towns and cities are under the control of the opposition forces, and we have full confidence in General Mood's UN mission, and we're sure that in each of the specific towns and cities, they will be able to stabilize the situation, to make sure that the armed individuals have left the towns and cities, and that the civil population can live peacefully and can overcome the current difficulties. And I would just recall at this point that we consider it completely unacceptable to try to block the activities of the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent as they try to evacuate peaceful citizens who have found themselves in the areas of armed conflict in different towns and cities. The attempts to impede these activities have been done by the armed opposition, and we have drawn particular attention to this. And then our partners really wanted us, within this action group on Syria, take a decision that a new resolution of the Security Council should be adopted with measures adopted which would be binding upon the Syrian people. We decided that was not acceptable because the group which met here today is not empowered to anticipate a decision to be taken by the Security Council of the United Nations. The UN Security Council has its own procedures. Any member state of the Security Council has the right to introduce a proposal which, according to the rules of procedure, will be examined. And on the basis of the examination, the Security Council will then decide the fate of such a proposal. It is our belief that before we start to talk at all about Chapter 7 of the Charter coming into play, we should do absolutely all to make sure that we implement Kofi Annan's plan on the basis of those limits, those documents already adopted by the Security Council. We have sufficient facts available stating that the armed opposition and those who finance and arm the opposition that sponsor them in the broader sense of the term are not complying with their obligations and are acting in such a way that it is not possible to ensure a peaceful situation. They are constantly provoking the Syrian government, the Syrian forces, which of course very often react in an inappropriate, disproportionate way. And I know that some of the armed groups and their sponsors are trying constantly to provoke a spiral of violence. There are many facts which speak to this. You can read the facts in American, Western European media sources, and you can see that this is happening in many towns and cities where there are attacks on police officers, attacks on administrative facilities, on state or private property, and unfortunately there's ever more facts emerging demonstrating that in Syria there is sectarian hate being incited. And just because someone belongs to a different confession or sect, that person is being killed. And including here innocent civilians. This is a very dangerous trend we are seeing, and in the document adopted we underscore the need to agree on acceptable paths out of the crisis which will take account of the interests of all parts of the Syrian society, ethnic, faith groups and all other groups. A key part of the document that we have adopted says that all of us who've met here today in Geneva are against further militarization of this conflict. This armed conflict has received weapons from outside through illegal deliveries, which are not permitted by international law, and these attempts have unfortunately continued, and the deliveries of illegal weapons to different armed groupings removes the incentive for them to lay down the weapons to take part in a peaceful process. So I very much hope that in today's document you can see the obligations that we've all undertaken here to respect. We're going to use all the influence we have to make sure that in the right way we can have a positive influence on all Syrians, the government and the opposition groups, in particular the armed opposition groups, so that they will implement the Kofi Annan plan. It's not an easy task. I hope you all understand that. Much will hinge upon the activities that we've mandated Kofi Annan to undertake. Kofi Annan already has a mandate from the UN Security Council on his 6-point plan. And today at our meeting we've had a useful outcome because we've had a representative meeting. We've had many of the external players who can have an influence on the situation. Unfortunately, it was not fully representative because there were some objections which I don't fully understand from our partners who did not support Kofi Annan's proposal to invite here Iran and Saudi Arabia. We actively lobbied for these two states to be included because they have a considerable influence in the situation. We wanted them to be present here today in Geneva, and I hope that when we hold a future meeting of the Action Group, our partners will be able to reconsider whether we could expand the scope of participation in the Action Group to make sure that it is fully representative, having the presence with us of all of the states which have some influence in real terms in Syria. We shall support Kofi Annan in all of his efforts. We said this not only in the press release, the communique, but also in the separate declaration on behalf of the Permanent Five of the Security Council. We'll support Kofi Annan in his activities, we support his plan, and we support the full application of resolutions 2042 and 2043. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Lavrov, Nordi Fridi from Al Arabiya News Channel. Yeah. vous avez la facilité.
You have the facility, Mr. Minister. Mr. Minister, you can put on the same basis the armed forces of the Syrian regime equal to armed groups or armed individuals who often have light weapons and who, as pictures have shown, are tanks and helicopters which have been pounding civilian districts. Your country is supporting not only, but it continues to arm with helicopters and heavy weapons to arm a regime which hitherto has not hesitated to kill or to be involved in the murder of more than 15,000 persons. So my question is, today after the discussions, are you going to ask Mr. Assad to cooperate with Mr. Annan? Because the first 6-point plan has not been implemented, as you're well aware. Thank you. I won't do this today because we've been doing this for 2 months now, and we have achieved official acceptance by the Syrian leadership of the Kofi Annan plan. And we will continue to ensure that the Syrian leadership should fulfill its obligations under the plan, and we do hope that our example will be followed by those who have influence over the groups such as the Free Syrian Army, which have publicly said that they will not implement the Kofi Annan plan. As you know, there are many states supporting the opposition, which literally the next day after the announcement of the Annan plan said that it will not work. I can't help suspecting that some states would like this plan to fail, just as there was artificially the mission of the League of Arab States was undermined in November of last year. As soon as the mission began to report on, give a picture which was somewhat different from what some of the media have tried to show, it was decided to stop it, and the media was called back. That was a colossal mistake. There were several hundred observers in that mission, and it was agreed to increase that number. And if that mistake had not been made in January of last year, right now what we would have a continuous international presence in Syria, perhaps even more than 1,000 persons, as observers of the League of Arab States, which of course could be fortified by or backed by observers from other countries. Now, there would have been a stabilizing presence in Syria, the international presence, but that mission was cancelled, and I see no other explanation except the fact that some people didn't want it to remain there. Some people wanted to make the situation more tense with regard to the internet and television pictures, etc., etc. Unfortunately, this war has a very serious informational dimension. Today I asked my colleagues in the Action Group what they thought about the fact that the European Union and then the Arab League had decided to block the Syrian television channels, satellite channels. I didn't get an answer, although with our friends from the European Union, we often meet on other issues, and the first question that they raise is freedom of journalists, freedom of speech, the protection of the rights of journalists. I don't remember when the bandit attack on the headquarters of the Syrian television channel near Damascus that there was any shock. Some international, I don't know whether any international journalist organization expressed a position on this in New York or anywhere else, but the fact that a war is going on there, I think many people here would agree. We know as journalists, especially a number of Al Jazeera journalists have resigned in protest against how viewers are being shown what is taking place in Syria. Some TV channels, Euronews, CNN, BBC, when they show iPhone pictures, they say that we cannot confirm the identity of these pictures. But that does not mean that in any way we are trying to justify the acts of the regime which presently exists in Syria. We have said on many occasions that the regime is primarily responsible for ensuring security of its citizens, for ensuring security in Syria. On a number of occasions we have said that the regime is definitely seriously late, very seriously late in carrying through reforms. But at the same time, we cannot say that the regime should simply withdraw its heavy artillery and shooting unarmed citizens. As to the armed formations who are fighting against the regime, they're receiving arms, and the European media and the U.S. media, this has been in other regions as well, this has been shown. So you cannot see everything in black and white. And it's not by accident that the Security Council stressed the need for all Syrian sides to stop the violence. And this idea has been particularly clearly set forth in the statement that we adopted today. So we will use all our influence which we have in Damascus. We will not limit our work only to contacts with the regime. In Moscow, virtually all the representatives of all the groups of the Syrian opposition have visited. The contacts are continuing. They're planned for the next week. And we are also in contact with the Syrian opposition through our embassies in Paris, London, Washington, and Ankara, the general consul in Istanbul. And we have a clear position which has been expressed, and we try to influence them. But when we talk to some of our contacts from the opposition that we call upon you to comply with the Annan plan, etc., they say, yes, we've heard you, but other external players tell us the exact opposite. Don't put down your weapons, don't stop the struggle, and foreign countries will help you. We said this today openly at the meeting which I called very useful. The talk was very frank and pragmatic, and I can say that I do hope that after this meeting, I have some hope that after this, the adoption of this document, its provisions will be adopted seriously, not only by all Syrian parties, but also by all participants in the action group. And the action that is required from us is coordinated in positive action, so that we should influence all of those who are fighting in Syria and demand from them, for their own people, for the fate of the region, to stop the violence and take up negotiations. In the action group, if everybody were to who was at the table today, if everybody did that intensely and honestly, then I think we can overcome the situation.
Good evening, Sergey Viktorovich. Can you tell me, please, have any mechanisms been developed to make sure that weapons are not delivered to different groups in Syria to bring an end to the smuggling in of weapons? Is there any kind of control mechanism to make sure this doesn't happen? And do you believe that the Arab and Western partners really will cooperate in this matter? Well, it's a question that I forgot to answer part of the previous question on the delivery of weapons. It's quite right. The anti-air defense weapons that we have delivered to Syria cannot be used against the opposition, in particular against peaceful demonstrations. They can only be used if there is an act of aggression from the air. Then, on the question which has just been put, we advocated for there being included in this document the need for there to be no further militarization of the conflict. We wanted to have included under this an end to be brought to the illegal delivery of weapons. Our partners couldn't agree to this in the final document, but I think they heard us, and I think that they have recognized their responsibility to make sure that this does not occur. Because to say that we support Kofi Annan's plan and that we want to have a peaceful national dialogue, but at the same time to deliver weapons to the opposition and to encourage their radical mood is something we cannot accept.
Monsieur le Ministre, Freddy Moulongo pour...
So, Minister, do you believe that Syria was right to shoot down the Turkish plane? Do you believe that this plane was flying over the Syrian airspace, the Syrian territory, or was it over international waters?
We were in favor that this incident should be carefully investigated, thoroughly investigated. We know that there is contradictory information about it. We expressed our deep regret concerning the event. We called for all necessary measures to be taken so that this should not happen again. Yes, we supported a joint investigation which could be conducted by Syria and Turkey. We have our own information of objective observation, and we are prepared to provide that information to those countries. But of course, the main responsibility lies with them. The most important thing right now is to prevent the use of any incident in order to increase the tensions on either side.
Roy Gutman of McClatchy Newspapers. Foreign Minister, you mentioned the flow of weapons to the resistance, and of course that is an issue. But as you also mentioned, they control territory, they control towns, they control a whole swath of territory. You know very well that it's hard to dislodge people who have fought mostly on their own without much help to get that territory. So what do you expect your partners to do to force them or to convince them to give up that territory, to give up the arms? And the other side of the coin is Mr. Assad has said that he doesn't want advice from any of his friends or outsiders on what he should do. What happens if he says no to the transitional government that Mr. Annan is hoping to deliver?
The first part of your question is very specific, and I suppose it hits the target. Today, we talked about that more than on any other aspect of the document. As I said, there were proposals from our partners that the government should withdraw all of its armed forces from the cities, and only after that could there be any requirements of the opposition that it should stop engaging in violence. As a result, the appeal was formulated simultaneously to the opposition and the government that they should stop the violence and cooperate with the UN mission in Syria, and that meaning that concrete action should be agreed and coordinated on the withdrawal of armed persons from the cities. We discussed this with Kofi Annan and with General Mood in detail, and this is a very serious and very difficult task in view of the degree of radicalization of the situation on both sides. We will do everything we can to help achieve this task. There is no single recipe for each town and for each city. Some are controlled by the government. The other cities and towns are controlled by the armed opposition. And that armed opposition is not necessarily the only. One city might be controlled by one group and another by another group. Nobody knows to what extent they are subordinate to a single command. Rather, on the contrary, they don't. It's known that they are not subject to a single command. So the UN mission, which is fairly small, has a huge burden. We think that the number of personnel should be increased, and we will await recommendations from Kofi Annan and General Mood concerning their view of defusing the situation in every particular town and village and city. I repeat, we will honestly fulfill the requirements of Security Council resolutions that the plan should be implemented. We will do this, as we have in the past, in contacts with the government and with all opposition groups. As I said, I do hope that those of our partners who have far more influence on the opposition than we do will act in the same way. The second question had to do with well, I think that we have to consider what is actually happening. To a great extent, thanks to our efforts as well, Mr. Assad has accepted the peace plan of the Arab League and then agreed to accept on his territory the mission of observers of the Arab states, and then he publicly undertook to fulfill the Kofi Annan plan, and he repeated that undertaking in a recent interview. He has agreed to the UN mission being there. He has agreed, and something that we try very urgently very much to do, with the UN of the access of 9 intergovernmental and non-governmental humanitarian organizations to Syria. Again, I suppose, at least to some extent, due to our recommendation, in response to our organization, he has allowed the access of journalists to Syria. And according to information that we have received from the UN, perhaps not completely, but even so, some of the requirements are being fulfilled to the effect that there must be a gradual release from prison of persons who have been kept there for participating in protests. So, regarding what advice is accepted by President Assad and what advice is being accepted by the opposition, comparing what has been happening, yes, I would say that things are late. There have been a lot of mistakes. But even so, the advice has been accepted by President Assad. As for the opposition, I don't know. I'm not even sure what advice they've been given. I just know that the Free Syrian Army has said that it will not implement the Kofi Annan plan. That was done. As to whether that was done as a result of advice or independently, I can't say. Let the woman ask a question.
Well, as we know, there's going to be the group of Friends of Syria in the very near future. Sergey Viktorovich, as we know, in a few days' time we're going to have the meeting. Sergey Viktorovich, as we know, very soon there's going to be the meeting of the group of Friends of Syria. Will that have an impact on the work of the action group? Well, you know that the name itself is telling, because if someone wants to be a friend of Syria, well then you have to make sure that you be taken as such by all Syrians. The group of Friends of Syria doesn't only work with one opposition group, but several opposition groups. And when we were preparing for this meeting, we asked our colleagues whether they needed to continue to meet as a group of Friends of Syria, which are just a group of friends of some parts of the opposition, given that we are trying to unite the efforts of external players and to coordinate them. We were told that if the Geneva meeting achieved a good outcome, then our partners would consider whether they would have to move forward with another meeting of the group of Friends of Syria. But apparently they didn't reconsider. They intend to have the meeting. That's their right. Our position on this meeting, on these meetings, on this format, is one that we have outlined before. I understand that there's some 40 countries invited. Many of them, I'm sure, won't be present. But what can they do in that format where you've got 40 countries present? Well, then you might as well be in the General Assembly of the United Nations. I repeat that I can't really comment on this. I don't know how it could have a positive impact on the efforts that we've undertaken to deploy today. If you look at, if colleagues feel that what has been agreed today could be used to move forward with the activities under the Group of Friends of Syria, that's a mistake, because what we would like to see is for the opposition to be united. But for it to be united, as a platform prepared to work with the government as required by the Annan Plan. So we are prepared to take part in all of the meetings convened to unite the opposition around a constructive political platform, and we shall facilitate that kind of unity. That's very important indeed. Otherwise, the government won't know who to talk to. And Kofi Annan understands the importance of this problem, and he will do everything he can to make sure that he could see unity amongst the opposition. As the last question.
Ishiguro of Yomiuri Shimbun, Japanese newspaper. In this document adopted today, the fate of President Assad is not clear, but in the view of Hillary Clinton, she says that it is clear that Assad has to go. Do you agree with her?
This is not at all implied by the document. In the original version, there was a phrase to the effect that the people should be excluded who are standing in the way of peace or preventing peace. That is not consistent with the principle of inclusiveness of the political process in Syria. It is not consistent with the provisions of the UN Charter on non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states. And it is not consistent with the logic of the document adopted today, which says that the fate of the country should be decided by Syrians themselves in all of its aspects. So the original thesis proposed in the document on the need to exclude some people from the peace process, that was deleted at our insistence. For that reason, you can see for yourselves, I am speaking on the basis of what was adopted today. Thank you.